Welcome back to our attendees. Our next speaker is Ahona Rudra, Digital Marketing Director and Content Manager at Power Dmarc, speaking on today's topic, email authentication, angle of cybersecurity. Before we
Thank
continue,
you.
I'd like to just make a quick announcement, which I forgot in the earlier round. Dear attendees, the contest is still on, so please do participate in the contest, and there are some exciting prizes, so do not miss it. Miss Auna, it's not for us and you, for you and me, unfortunately. So over to you, Miss Auna. Take over.
Thank you, Melvin. First of all, I would like to thank all of our attendees and speakers today who are present here for the session. And thank you to Oman Data Park for giving me the opportunity to present at the Digital Enablement Summit of 2021 for the free zone sector. So the topic we're going to cover today is email authentication as the missing angle of cybersecurity in the free zone sector. So let us begin with an outline of today's program. First of all, we are going to talk about what email authentication is all about and why we need to implement it in the free zone sector, especially assessing the threats involved and the risks that are at play here. Then we will be moving on to the various authentication protocols or mechanisms that we can configure for your domain to mitigate the threats and vulnerabilities at your organization. So we're going to talk about the problem as well as the solution that we are offering around it. Email authentication or validation is a collection of techniques aimed at providing verifiable information about the origin of email messages by validating the domain ownership of any MTA who participated in transferring and possibly modifying a message. And the reason why we need email authentication in this current situation, especially because email have become, as we all know, the most potent form of communication, and email fraud attacks and cases literally blown out of proportion in the present times. To broadly categorize email fraud attacks, we can refer to two types of attacks mainly, that is domain spoofing attacks and email phishing. Domain spoofing attacks is when a threat actor tries to forge your domain name to make emails look like it is being sent from your organization when they're really not. This helps tricking victims who rely on your company for services. Now, in the chain of events that follows domain spoofing, it ultimately concludes with a phishing attack being deployed on unsuspecting victims to steal login credentials, bank details, and sensitive information. This can lead to huge data breaches and loss of financial assets as well. There are several ways basically cyber attackers can use to trick your users. They can pose to be the CEO or the CTO of your company, termed as CEO fraud. Your sales support raise fake invoices or inject ransomware into the systems. This can drastically affect your brand reputation, credibility, and growth. And most importantly, it takes a huge toll on your email deliverability rates. This also drastically impacts your email marketing campaigns. Experts believe that cyber attacks are not likely to subside this year due to the growth in online users as well as increase in work from home environments. The number of attacks have gone up considerably since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. UAE, being one of the leading economies in the Middle East, has become the prime target for malicious actors, making it one of the most affected countries in the region and accounting for the bulk of COVID-19 themed attacks. Survey results of 2020 also showed that 36% of respondents said the biggest IT challenge their organization has faced during the following shift to remote working was securing data of their employees remotely. Around 45% said that their organizations experienced data loss, which resulted in business downtime. Yet more than 40% of organizations in the free zone sectors have not yet adopted measures for protection against cyber attacks. Coming to the information that is depicted on the slides over here, cybercrime is estimated to cost worldwide an amount of 10.5 trillion annually by 2025, up from 3 trillion in 2015. At a growth rate of 15% year over year, Cybersecurity Ventures also reports that cybercrime represents the greatest transfer of economic wealth in history. So there has been a 200% increase in BEC attacks since 2020, and the numbers are only just rising. So we need to deploy steps very quickly to get control of the situation. So now proceeding to the number of protocols that you can configure for your domain to minimize BEC, that is business email compromise, and spoofing in the free zone sector. We are going to talk about 6 protocols today as enlisted here. That is DMARC, DKIM, SPF, MTSTS, TLS, RPT, and finally BIMI. So coming to the very first one we have here is a Sender Policy Framework, or SPF, as a standard email authentication protocol. SPF works by enlisting all of the authorized IP addresses that are allowed to send emails from your domain. So if a malicious IP tries to impersonate your domain, SPF authentication will fail, as a receiving MTA would not be able to locate the IP in your SPF record that is published in a domain's DNS. So SPF works by the receiving MTA performing a DNS query request, more popularly known as DNS lookup, to check for authorized IP addresses. Another protocol that is relied on by the major industry players for email security is DKIM, or Domain Keys Identified Mail. DKIM assigns a cryptographic signature to every outgoing email message, also known as private key, which is then verified by the receiving MTA against the public key that resides in the sender's DNS. When the two keys are a match, DKIM passes for that email, else it will fail. Now coming to Dmarc. Dmarc makes use of both SPF and DKIM to authenticate outbound messages. Let us study a test case where Dmarc is not implemented, so as to understand the situation a bit better. So in that case, the email message is simply received by the receiving email server that checks the visible headers to see who the message is addressed towards. It subsequently delivers the message without validating the sending sources. So irrespective of emails coming from an illegitimate source or a legitimate source, emails are always delivered, which is very dangerous. In the next situation where Dmarc is implemented, the receiving MTA checks for SPF authentication and a DKIM authentication. And if either of them passes, the email is dropped in the recipient's inbox, else it can either be delivered or quarantined or even rejected based on the Dmarc policy that you have configured for your domain. So the authority really lies in the hand of the domain owner. And you can decide how you want the MTA to respond to email messages that are failing authentication checks. So a question might occur that if you already have SPF and DKIM already configured separately for the domain, why do we still need to implement Dmarc to build on that? This is because while SPF and DKIM cannot address the from domain on their own, here is where Dmarc pitches in and makes use of domain alignment. Dmarc actually validates three identifiers for the domain. That is the return path header, the domain in the DKIM signature header, and the domain in the from header. If either of them is a match, Dmarc will pass, else Dmarc fails due to domain misalignment. It also helps specify to receiving MTAs how to respond to messages failing authentication checks. Hence, Dmarc actually invokes control in the domain owner's hand, as I said before. And this ultimately helps to block out emails from illegitimate sources and protect your domain name from impersonation. So all this while, we have been talking about the domain owner as the email sender. For this next protocol that we have here, which is MTSDS, we're going to talk about the domain owner as the email receiver instead. SMTP is the industry standard for email transfer used by worldwide majority, as we know. It is a very standard email transfer system. When it was first introduced, it had no protocol to ensure an encrypted transfer of information. So security had to be retrofitted later on. And even then, it now uses opportunistic encryption to this day, which means that, that a secured connection cannot be negotiated between two SMTP servers if in that case, the messages are still sent in plain text, which is not what you want to do, because if a message is sent in plain text, it can be easily manipulated and accessed by threat actors. Now a message that is sent in plain text can be accessed, manipulated, and tampered by a threat actor, which is actually called a man-in-the-middle attacker. Hence, making encryption mandatory in SMTP was the need of the hour at that time. And that is exactly what MTSDS does. MTSDS makes encryption mandatory in SMTP, so that messages are never delivered in plain text, which keeps MITM attacks like SMTP downgrade and DNS spoofing completely at bay. So very briefly discussing what an SMTP downgrade attack is to understand the situation a bit better. It is when an attacker rolls back an encrypted SMTP connection into an unencrypted one by tampering with the encryption command, that is a start TLS command. It is known as a downgrade attack. On the other hand, when an attacker intercepts the MX DNS request to manipulate the sending server into sending the email in an attacker-controlled email server, instead of the original receiving server to which the email was previously destined towards, it is termed as a DNS spoofing attack. Now, when MTSTS is implemented, there is no way to notify if the messages are not being delivered to you. It might as well happen that an encrypted connection could not be established and the message was not delivered with MTSTS configured. So how do you know as a domain owner that if your message was delivered or it was not delivered? So here is when TLS RPT steps in. SMTP TLS reporting works together with MTSTS, complementing it, just instantly notify you on issues in email delivery so that you can fix them faster. So it communicates the volume of delivered emails as well as those that failed delivery. The reports are generated in JSON format, which is simplified here at Power Dmarc. We simplified for you just to make them way more comprehensive and easy to read, because JSON format files are not really easy to read for non-technical people. Finally, the last protocol that we have here is brand indicators for message identification, also known as BIMI. So brand indicators for message identification is when you are actually implementing a protocol to improve your brand recall and make your brand visually identifiable in recipient inboxes. So what if I tell you that there is not only a way to authenticate your sending sources, but there's also now a way to make your brand visually identifiable in your recipients' inboxes. This is where BIMI attaches your unique brand logo to each of your outbound messages so that your recipients can instantly recognize your brand in their inboxes. This helps enhance brand recall and boost brand credibility. And just not that, BIMI is also a great tool for email marketing purposes, because the more your brand recall and the more identifiable you are, the more your recipients are going to open your email as soon as they receive it in their inbox and they see your logo. So what we do at Power Dmarc is basically we make protocol implementation very easy for domain owners by handling majority of the work in the background to make emails safe again. We have been striving to resolve various security problems faced by users in the industry with effective security solutions around them. It is a no-brainer that protocol implementation requires constant monitoring to ensure everything is functioning the way it should. We have always stepped in to provide easy monitoring facilities alongside solutions that really automates the process to the maximum. So yeah, that is it from my side. Despite the time crunch, I hope I was able to touch base on everything effectively. Thank you so much for attending the session.
Thank you, Ms. Ahona. So, dear attendees, if you have any questions, please send it over to us and we will pass it on to Ms. Ahona. And please, Ms. Ahona, you can reply back to them.
Sure. Thank you so much.